I never thought my job as a storage facility manager would lead me down this dark path. The Riverside Storage Complex had always been just another quiet workplace on the outskirts of town. Rows upon rows of identical metal doors, bathed in the sickly glow of flickering fluorescent lights. That was until Unit 23B came due for auction after 6 months of unpaid rent. The morning I went to cut the lock, something felt off. The padlock on Unit 23B was different from our standard issue. It was a heavy-duty military-grade lock that seemed excessive for a simple storage unit. I remember the weight of the bolt cutters in my hands, the metallic scrape as I positioned them around the lock's shackle. The sound it made when it finally gave way echoed through the empty corridor like a gunshot. The door rolled up with a grinding screech that set my teeth on edge. The musty smell hit me first, that typical storage unit staleness, but with an underlying chemical tang that burned my nostrils. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing stacks of ordinary-looking moving boxes labeled in neat black marker. Books, photos. Nothing suspicious except for their pristine condition. No dust, no cobwebs. Someone had been here recently. The first box I opened contained hundreds of Polaroid photographs, meticulously dated and organized. They showed various storage facilities across the country, different units, different locations, but all photographed in the same clinical way. Each photo captured the moment before the unit was opened, then after, and finally empty. What disturbed me most was the precision. These weren't casual snapshots, but documentation. Beneath the photos, I found newspaper clippings spanning 2 decades, missing persons cases, all unsolved. The victims shared nothing in common, except for one detail buried in the police reports. Their last known locations were near storage facilities. My hands trembled as I read article after article, names and faces blurring together in a grotesque parade of the forgotten. In the corner of the unit, partially hidden behind a stack of boxes, I found a leather-bound journal. The handwriting inside was cramped and methodical, detailing dates, locations, and what appeared to be a scoring system. Some entries were accompanied by small drawings, floor plans of storage facilities with certain units marked with red X's. My blood ran cold when I recognized the layout of my own facility, Unit 23B, clearly marked. The final box contained industrial invoices for commercial refrigeration equipment delivered to various addresses across the country. Each delivery coincided with a missing person report from the newspaper clippings. The most recent invoice was dated just 2 months ago, for a warehouse less than 20 miles from my facility. I called the police immediately. Within hours, the storage facility became a crime scene. Forensics teams found trace evidence in Unit 23B that linked to 3 separate missing persons cases. The industrial freezer from the invoice was located in the warehouse, but it was empty and had been meticulously cleaned with industrial-grade chemicals. The security footage from our facility proved useless. The cameras had captured someone visiting Unit 23B regularly during night hours, but they knew exactly how to avoid showing their face. They moved with the confidence of someone familiar with surveillance systems, always keeping their head down, wearing nondescript clothing. The investigation revealed a pattern spanning the entire country. Similar storage units had been rented using stolen identities, each one abandoned after roughly 6 months. The FBI found encrypted communications on a hidden server linking these units to a sophisticated criminal network. They called it the Storage King case, after a phrase repeated in the journal, "Every king needs a castle, every castle needs a dungeon." As the investigation expanded, more victims were discovered. The pattern was always the same: storage units rented near major highways, victims who wouldn't be immediately missed, and methodical documentation of each location. The journal suggested there were dozens more sites yet to be discovered. The FBI's profile painted a picture of an organized, intelligent killer who treated murder like a business, complete with accounting and inventory. That was 3 years ago. The Storage King was never caught. Sometimes, when I'm alone at work, I'll catch myself studying the faces of new customers, wondering if they're just looking for extra space or something else. Every time I hear the metallic rattle of a unit door opening, I think about what I found in 23B. The case went cold, but I know they're still out there. Storage facilities continue to be their kingdom, and we're all just unsuspecting servants maintaining their castles. Last week, a new customer rented Unit 45C. Their paperwork was flawless, their payment made in advance, but something about their methodical inspection of the unit made my skin crawl. As I watched them secure the door with a heavy-duty military-grade lock, identical to the one I'd cut off 23B, I felt that familiar dread creeping back. I should call the FBI, but what would I tell them? That someone rented a storage unit and locked it securely? That they seemed too organized, too precise? The hardest part isn't the nightmares or the constant paranoia. It's knowing that right now, somewhere in this country, another storage facility manager is going through their daily routine, unaware that they're maintaining another castle in the Storage King's empire. And sooner or later, they'll have to cut another lock, roll up another door, and discover just what kind of kingdoms we've been harboring all along. The Cedar Grove Community Garden used to be my sanctuary. As head of the neighborhood gardening committee, I spent countless hours there, nurturing vegetables and flowers alongside my fellow gardeners. We were a tight-knit group, sharing tips and tools, taking pride in our little plots of earth. That was before the soil started telling its secrets. It started when Marco, one of our newer members, began expanding his plot. His tomatoes were extraordinary, plump, blood-red fruits that grew faster and larger than anyone else's. The soil in his plot was different too, darker, richer, with an odd smell that lingered in your nostrils. He said it was a special composting technique he'd perfected over the years. The community tool shed became Marco's second home. He'd spend hours there after dark, claiming he was organizing equipment and preparing compost. The security lights would catch his shadow moving back and forth, hauling bags and wheelbarrows. None of us thought much of it. Dedicated gardeners can be eccentric, and his results spoke for themselves. Everything changed during the spring thaw. The winter had been unusually harsh, and the freeze-thaw cycle had shifted the soil in unexpected ways. Sarah, whose plot bordered Marco's, noticed something pale protruding from the ground near their shared boundary. She thought it was a plastic bag at first, until she saw the distinctive curve of what could only be a human finger bone. The police investigation revealed horrifying levels of organic material in Marco's soil. The lab reports showed concentrated deposits of calcium, phosphorus, and nitrogen, consistent with decomposed human remains. But Marco was long gone, having disappeared a week before Sarah's discovery, leaving only his immaculate garden plots and a locked shed full of meticulously maintained tools. As the investigation deepened, detectives uncovered a pattern. Every city where Marco had previously maintained a garden plot had unsolved missing persons cases. The victims were always transients, people who wouldn't be immediately missed. Their disappearances coincided with bumper crops of unusually large vegetables at local community gardens. We found his awards, dozens of them from gardening competitions across the country. Each certificate told the same story: exceptional produce, notably rich soil, unmatched results. The dates and locations matched perfectly with clusters of missing persons reports. He'd been perfecting his technique for over a decade, leaving a trail of blue ribbons and bodies buried under pristine vegetable plots. The tool shed revealed more horrors. Behind a false wall, we found a carefully organized collection of industrial chemicals, accelerants for decomposition, compounds to mask odors, and substances to alter soil pH. Each container was meticulously labeled with dates and ratios. He'd turned human decomposition into a science of gardening. The FBI's forensic botanists were both horrified and fascinated. Marco had developed a systematic approach to using human remains as fertilizer, positioning bodies so root systems would develop through decomposing tissue. His journal detailed how different vegetables responded to various soil enrichment techniques. The level of detail was clinical, academic even. In his gardening diary, we found references to historical practices, ancient burial grounds producing abundant crops, folklore about blood enriching the soil. He saw himself as part of a tradition, practicing an extreme form of sustainable gardening. His entries spoke of completing the cycle and returning nutrients to the earth. The investigation expanded nationwide. Every community garden where Marco had worked was excavated. Some yielded bones, others showed only trace evidence, but each confirmed his pattern. He never stayed more than 2 growing seasons in one location, always moving before suspicions could arise about his extraordinary growing success. They never caught him. The case went cold after 6 months, though every spring brings new leads as gardens across the country are tilled and bones surface. His methods have become a horrifying legend in gardening communities. Some say he's still out there, joining new community gardens, perfecting his grotesque craft. These days, I can't look at a thriving vegetable garden without wondering about the soil composition. Every time I read about a new community garden opening or see an award-winning tomato at a county fair, I think about Marco. The police maintain an active file, tracking community gardens and missing persons reports, waiting for his pattern to emerge again. Last month, I received a package. Inside was a single perfect tomato and a blue ribbon from a recent state fair competition. There was no note, no return address, but I recognized the size and color immediately. I called the FBI, but by the time they investigated, the garden where it had been grown was already abandoned. The soil tests came back positive for human remains. Sometimes at night, I walk through our restored community garden, now fitted with security cameras and bright lights. The plots where Marco grew his prize-winning vegetables remain empty, the soil long since removed and replaced. But every spring, despite no one planting them, tomatoes still grow there, larger and redder than any others in the garden. They grow from seeds left behind, fed by something deep in the earth that refuses to let go of its secrets. Working the night shift at KXRW Radio's transmission facility was supposed to be the perfect job for my graduate studies. Located 30 miles outside the city, the aging radio tower stood alone in an empty field, surrounded by nothing but wheat and silence. Just me, my research papers, and the occasional equipment check. The isolation never bothered me until the first mystery broadcast. It happened during my 3rd month on the job. The transmitter reading suddenly spiked at 3:17 a.m., well beyond normal parameters. Our automated adult contemporary playlist was interrupted by a burst of static, followed by what sounded like snippets of old broadcasts, except we'd gone fully digital years ago. No analog tapes existed in our system. The oscilloscope showed impossible patterns that night. The signal manifestation looked like nothing I'd seen in my engineering courses, frequencies modulating in ways that shouldn't be physically possible. When I reported it to my supervisor, he dismissed it as equipment malfunction. But I knew better. Modern digital transmitters don't malfunction in ways that produce coherent broadcasts. I started digging through the station's archives. KXRW had been broadcasting since 1953, and the tower's history was darker than I expected. 3 technicians had died in mysterious accidents during the first decade of operations. Each death occurred during the night shift, each blamed on equipment failure, and each exactly 10 years apart. The technical specifications revealed modifications I'd never noticed before. Hidden beneath layers of modern equipment were remnants of the original transmission system, including components that didn't match any standard broadcasting design. The grounding system formed an unusual pattern around the tower base. Not the typical radial layout, but something more complex. My discovery of the maintenance tunnel was accidental. While tracing cable routes, I found that some of the original wiring disappeared into a subsurface conduit. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind rusted equipment cabinets, sealed with a heavy door that looked far more secure than necessary for a simple cable run. The tunnel led to a room full of old recording equipment and hundreds of magnetic tapes. Most had deteriorated beyond recovery, but a few were still intact. The labels showed dates corresponding to the technician deaths, along with strings of numbers that looked like geographical coordinates. Every tape was marked with the same time, 3:17 a.m. Further research revealed that before becoming a commercial station, KXRW had been a government facility. The frequencies used during its early years matched patterns used in experimental military communications. But the documents I found suggested something more sinister than simple military broadcasts. References to signal enhancement through biological resonance and consciousness modulation studies. When I analyzed the mystery broadcasts, I found layers of subliminal patterns beneath the static. The frequencies matched human neural oscillations, specifically those associated with fear responses and memory formation. More disturbing were the embedded coordinates. They pointed to locations where people had gone missing over the past 70 years. The old maintenance logs told a chilling story. Every decade during the same week, the tower would experience power fluctuations. Equipment would malfunction in specific patterns, and somewhere within 200 miles of the tower, someone would disappear without a trace. The last entry in the original log was stained with what the lab later confirmed was blood. Local weather radar archives showed unusual atmospheric phenomena during each incident. Perfect circles of electromagnetic disturbance centered on the tower, expanding outward at precise intervals. The pattern matched no known natural phenomenon. When I overlaid the missing persons' locations, each disappearance occurred exactly where the circles intersected with major population centers. The FBI's investigation stalled despite my evidence. They found traces of classified projects from the 1950s, but most records had been destroyed or buried under national security restrictions. The coordinates from the tapes led to cold cases spanning 7 decades. The only connection was their proximity to powerful radio transmitters. The pattern is accelerating now. The mystery broadcasts come more frequently, growing stronger each time. Last week, I recorded signal strengths that should be impossible with our equipment. The subliminal frequencies are changing too, becoming more complex, more purposeful. Each broadcast seems to be building towards something. Yesterday, I found markings carved into the tower's foundation, hidden beneath years of overgrowth. They match no known alphabet, but their arrangement mirrors the pattern of disappearances on the map. The concrete around them is discolored, as if the stone itself were reacting to some unknown force. Our signal engineers say the tower's radiation pattern has begun to shift, focusing tightly on specific geographic points. Tonight marks exactly 70 years since the first technician's death. The automated system is malfunctioning, trying to play phantom audio files that don't exist in our database. The transmitter readings are climbing beyond anything I've seen before. At 3:17 a.m., something is going to broadcast from this tower, but I'm no longer sure it's coming from any equipment we can see. I'm documenting everything in case someone finds this. The original government project didn't end. It evolved, using commercial radio as cover for something bigger. The tower isn't just broadcasting, it's receiving, gathering data through some kind of consciousness manipulation experiment that's been running autonomously for decades. Each disappearance adds to its pattern, refines its signal. The tech who trained me quit the day after I started, but his last words keep haunting me. The tower doesn't transmit music to people. It transmits people through music. I didn't understand then. I think I do now. If you're reading this, stay away from radio towers, and whatever you do, never listen to broadcasts at 3:17 a.m. Some frequencies were never meant for human ears.